One, and we're live. Good afternoon, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery Board. The first item on the agenda is the election of chair. Can I have a nomination for chair, please? If you'd like to raise your hand. Councillor Cook.
Could I nominate Councillor Drew Heffernan from Sutton?
Councillor Heffernan. Do I have a seconder? Oh, we got two seconders. Is that agreed? Great. So, Councillor Heffernan, over to you.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute there. So do we open up for a nomination to a vice chair now? Is that
Yes, please.
Yeah. So have any nominations for a vice chair? Councillor Draper? I think you're on mute, Councillor.
It was Agatha who was putting her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Agatha.
Yeah, I was going to subject Councillor Williams if he's interested.
I
can't hear you.
Oh, Councillor Williams, could you unmute?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I had. I never overlook such an opportunity. Thank you very much. Yes, I would accept.
Okay, do we have anyone to second Councillor Williams? Councillor Draper, thank you. And can we agree that nomination? I'll see a show of hands. Okay, thank you. And that's carried. Welcome to the team. Thank you. So we now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is apologies for absence. I know we have apologies from Councillor Anderson. Do we have any other apologies?
None, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving swiftly on, the next item is minutes from the previous meeting, and we have a note that the minutes are not available and they'll be reported to the next meeting of the Cemetery Board. So all we're being asked to do is note that we will receive them next time. So can we agree that? Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 5, which is the annual governance statement. Do we have someone to present that? I think, Zoe, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Hi. This is the annual governance statement for Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery Board. It draws heavily on the annual governance statement that's compiled by London Borough of Merton, because it uses all the systems and processes that are established by Merton. So you'll see very much through the documentation, it refers heavily to the systems and the processes that have been established within the London Borough of Merton. The annual governance statement draws on the Solis SIPFA framework for delivering good governance that was updated in 2016 and is based around 7 principles. So within Appendix 1, which is actually the annual governance statement, each of the principles in turn are addressed and, as I've said, draw quite heavily on the processes and procedures that have been established within Merton. And then within Section 10 are the actions that specifically were to be undertaken during 1920 and those that will be undertaken in 2021. And I know that Doug's unable to be here today, but he was going to update everybody as part of his verbal update to the meeting on the process on the review of roles and responsibilities. And the other item that we have within section 10 is really the recovery from the impact of COVID-19. And that, again, I've got a statement later on to read out from Doug regarding how the cemetery coped with COVID-19 and the first steps as we're coming out of it. Are there any questions?
No, I can't see anyone with their hand up. I don't know how you're doing it in Merton. Do you use the chat function on Zoom at all? Yeah, because I know it'd be easier for me to see if you want to raise a point if you just note there. But I don't think we do have. Oh, Councillor McGrath.
Well, this isn't specifically on this. This is more to do with the absence of Doug. I mean, this is by no means the first time Doug's been absent from this committee, which meets pretty rarely, and it just seems particularly unfortunate. I mean, I'd almost rather rearrange the dates of the meetings so that we can have him here, because obviously there are other issues which we may want his expertise on.
Okay, thank you. I think what we can do is, if there are any particular questions that arise, would we be able to go back to Doug with the questions and have them come back to us? It might mean that we need a briefing with him separate to this meeting, but that is possibly a way forward, given that he's not here and we may have quite a few questions for him.
Could I just ask the clerk, Chairman?
Yeah.
I mean, Doug was at the pre-meeting last week. Is there a business or a personal reason why he can't be here? Because if it's a business reason, then I think the point that Councillor McGrath makes is sound. If it's a personal reason, then of course we'll be completely understanding.
Indeed.
Yes, Councillor Williams, I had noticed just before the meeting that he wasn't able to attend due to sickness.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Do we have any other questions on this item? No? Okay, if that's okay, then we can move to the officer's recommendation, which is that the annual governance statement be noted and agreed. Can I have a show of hands, if that's fine? Okay, thank you. That is carried. So next thing is the abstract of accounts 2019-20. You'll find it on page 13 to 36 of your agenda pack. If you want to look at it, can we have who's going to be presenting this?
That's me. Yeah, that's me again. I'm not sure if I'm mute.
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, brilliant. Again, this is reported annually to the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery Board. It's the annual abstract of accounts. And there are a number of appendices that underpin all the information that's being presented. I think that the key thing to note is that during the financial year, there have been substantial negotiations with ID Verdi. And when we prepared the revised estimate, we were unsure how protected Merton and Sutton income would be. Subsequent to that, we have had confirmation from ID Verdi that we will receive our income in accordance with the original agreement. Hence, there's been a rather large adjustment for income that's due during 18-19 and 19-20. In addition to that, there were a number of special projects that were lined up to be undertaken during the financial year, mainly around bearer beams and the safety of memorials. there were certain delays to that as information was gathered of exactly what work needed to be undertaken. And there was a lot of testing of memorials that had to be undergone. And as part of the contractor report, you'll see there's an update on information on that and the writing out to individuals about their dangerous memorials. Suffice it to say that just as the programme was going to start to forge ahead, coronavirus hit, and that delayed the work that was going to be undertaken during March. So there wasn't much of a spend. And where resources were targeted towards pulling together that information, there wasn't an awful lot spent on maintenance of the existing buildings either. So there's been quite a substantial underspend with regards to the special projects and maintenance. And that has influenced within 2.3 on page 14 the level of prepayments and debtors that were raised at the year end. Also, as part of closing this year, there were a number of funds and balances, and over a number of years I've undertaken quite a lot of extensive research, and we've cleared those down. So where we had a reserve for maintenance of graves, we no longer keep information in order to maintain that separate fund. So they've actually stopped keeping the information and selling that sort of service to people using the cemetery. So I've cleared that down. The same with the capital fund. We don't tend to use the capital fund now. We tend to make provisions directly for maintenance and such items. And there was also a small investment, and I could find no evidence of that investment. So all those small balances have been cleared down. With the additional income and clearing down those balances, the common fund is now just over £1 million. So what I would like to do is to actually investigate a longer term investment of about 600k of that to try and generate slightly more interest for the board going forward. So we're happy to discuss that. And based on information that I've gathered since February, I've also tweaked the revenue estimate at Appendix H. So we've received additional information from the actuarial evaluation where there was a secondary charge to top up the pension fund. The pension fund is now in a positive position and there will be no secondary charge. So we estimate that the contribution for the next 3 years will be in the region of about 5k at most. So I've amended the revenue estimates for that. So as we move through the various appendices, Appendix A shows you the movements in the various reserves over the last 2 years. Appendix B provides the balance sheet, debtors and creditors. Appendix C shows you the income and expenditure in comparison to both the budget and last year's outcome, with a breakdown of the movement on the various funds shown at page 22. Then the cash flow statement is shown on page 23. And then on page 24, we have the return that we make to Little John's for small bodies. So the accounts have already been audited by our internal audit section, and then they are then, once approved by the board, they are then sent off to Little John's to review and sign off. Then Appendix F gives a breakdown of all the capital assets, and G provides the history right back to the inception of the board of key data such as the number of interments, income and expenditure, precepts and surpluses. And then, as I said earlier, Appendix 8 then recast slightly the revenue estimate. So we've tweaked for the super fund cost and the outcome of contractor negotiations, and the unspent balance on replacement bearer beams has been rolled forward into this financial year. So there's quite a large sum of money currently in the revenue estimates for replacement and new bearer beams. At Appendix I, we have the risk register. That's on page 34 and page 35. Within this, we left updating the risk register right to the last minute because of the impact of COVID-19. So we left it right until the 12th of June before we updated it, just to get the final information in. And you'll also see the impact that COVID-19 has actually had on income figures from the contractor report and interment levels. Then the second item is about operational service delivery. And here it focuses in mainly around the memorials and the bearer beams. And as you may well remember, we had a bit of an issue about overflowing rubbish bins. So that item is still being monitored. The pension fund item, I'm actually recommending that we remove that item based on the expected contributions over the next 3 years. And on the contract arrangement and the contract itself, the negotiations are now concluding. However, the score on this item hasn't been reduced because of the possible impact of COVID-19 on the operation of ID Birdie. So we've not changed the score on this item. So that's it on talking you through the annual accounts. Has anybody got any questions?
I'll mute myself. Councillor Williams had a question. First of all.
Thank you. I've got a couple, so I'll try and put them all in one for you. So I was going to ask about the special projects, and I've now seen, and you've referred to the fact that they didn't happen in 1920, and so they've been moved into the budget for 2021. And the interment income was higher than we expected, and I think that largely accounts for the big movement in the surplus compared with budget. But taking account of the risk register and the anticipation of a surge whilst dealing with interments resulting from a pandemic that then may impact subsequently with reduced interments, has any attempt been made to yet take a view on what that impact might be?
We're monitoring the situation quite closely. If I can take you to the contractor report, we had reports that say that interments at Merton and Sutton were up 300%. That was either in March or April, it's slightly vague. So you can see on page 41 that March, April and May interment levels are up. Obviously April is much higher, but you can see May is returning to normal. So we expect that that will come down. What I was going to actually suggest when we were talking about the contractor report was in a few months' time, I'll be requesting further information from ID Verdi on their income levels, probably after the summer. And then hopefully we might see some trends there. So I'll happily obtain that information, sit down and do some analysis with Doug, and then we can circulate something round, because we're a little bit too close to the impact in order to draw any trends coming out the other side at the moment.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I accept that, and only on the basis of what I've read in the paper, and of course I believe everything, that some of the people who have died during the pandemic, particularly the elderly, maybe the virus has simply hastened their death by a matter of months. And over the course of a 12-month, we might see not as much of a difference as we're seeing right now. And I think that's what the risk register reflects, isn't it?
That is what we're anticipating. We think there won't be, over the financial year as a whole, I don't expect there to be that much different. But we don't know financially what sort of position ID Verdi is going to be in. So when I forecast the income likely, I've just forecast it at the base amount. So so we've been very prudent in what we're estimating going forward. We're kind of assuming the worst. Well, I think we've got healthy reserves, which we're looking to invest to hopefully get a high level of interest on. But I think we probably need to be a little bit wary on the income levels going forward. And also, there were steps taken to, I think, cope with the levels of demand for burials and things like that. I think we are sensitive, I suppose, to what that impact might have been on the actual operation of ID Verdi themselves. So I think there's a number of unknowns. So although they're just coming out of one set of negotiations, ID Verdi could now be in a completely different place. So, but I think from the point of view of Merton and Sutton, I think we're on solid ground. I think going forward, we would expect the impairment levels to be slightly lower. If they do go quite a bit lower, we have sufficient reserves to cushion ourselves over that period. So I think from a financial point of view, we can carry that burden. So, but we will be monitoring it closely.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one final question, which is slightly different, if I might. Just looking at the balance sheet and hearing what you were saying about investing money, was there ever any expectation that we would repay the 1.2, 1.3 million, half and half from Merton and Sutton that was an original loan? Or is that loan not to be worried about?
Well, when I do the closing report, I don't actually include the loan schedule in the information, but in the budget report I do. So we've actually agreed with the constituent councillors when we will repay the money. I do not have a problem approaching Merton and Sutton to ask them if they want us to pay some of the money early and recalculate the schedule.
We'll have your money.
Councillor Williams, does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure. Councillor McGrath has 2 questions.
Well, the first one was exactly the same as Councillor Williams, which was, is there some value in repaying some of our loans early? I don't know what the interest rates are, but there may well be, so thank you for asking that. And the second one was, on the replacement for the bearer beams, we've increased the amount in the budget to catch up with what we didn't spend last year. If we spend that money, does that replace all the bearer beams, or are there still others left to do in subsequent years?
I will ask Doug to answer that question, but I think he's kind of alluded to the answer before, in that the assessment will be, as at today, as we go forward, some of the older bearer beams then do start to become unsafe and require replacing. I think if you think back a number of years ago, we replaced all the bearer beams in section B, and we were told then that they were the only bearer beams that needed to be replaced. We're now 5 or 6 years down the line, and the situation is there's now some other areas where the bearer beams need replacing. So I think the bottom line is when those bearer beams were put in, the standard that was used then obviously hasn't stood the test of time. So as they're replacing them, they're replacing them to a higher standard.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor.
Do you want me to?
Yeah, you have a question, yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, it is a bit of a question. It's about the pandemic risk on page 34. And it relates to what David Williams was asking as well just now. What we're told is that the total number of deaths is well over and above what you'd actually expect from just COVID, so there is a there is a massive increase in death. We know about that, and I sort of wonder whether there's a sensitivity around saying, well, it just evens out over a period of time. Everything evens out over a period of time. Over a period of time, we all die. But I mean, the reality is that I don't see deaths as a whole reducing just to make up for the deaths that we've had early. And given that, putting things like this, which says, you know, we're going to lose some money because nobody's going to die anymore, seems to be a tiny bit insensitive. I think there's a way of expressing these things which isn't quite like this. This is a public document, and I just like us to investigate how we can actually treat the pandemic, because it was a pandemic. It is a pandemic for what it is, and just respect the people who have died and the people who've had to deal with the people who have died, rather than express it like this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Draper. I think we'll take that comment and maybe come back to that in the future. I mean, it's interesting to point out that before we entered the pandemic, we had this language in there, and it was always something that was theoretical, and then it finally happens, and it does then draw your attention to the language. But like I said, I'm sure we can take it away, but it is something that we have to look at on the risk register in terms of our financial outlook. But maybe there is a better way. Councillor Cook asked on the question on the chat. So do you want to have a question? I know.
I do.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you, Drew, for taking up the chair of this committee. Thank you for doing that. And there were a couple of things I wanted to ask, but Councillor Williams has really already asked the questions. But if I could just ask Zoe, you mentioned about moving some money over to put it into an investment account where you might get a high interest rate. I'd love to know where that would be, because I don't know how.
Investigate. So at the moment, on our balances, we generate 0.75% interest. So this was merely to investigate whether we could get a higher rate of interest. But we now have a second option, a very valid option, is to actually repay the loan to Merton and to Sutton earlier. Which
that was going to be my second question, actually. I mean, what Councillor, I think it was Councillor Williams mentioned earlier about that, the option to do that. I think with the getting the sense of how the budgets are in both of our main councils, I'm sure they could do with any help they could possibly get. And if we can assist them in that way, I would think that would be a really good thing to do. So that was my my second question, really.
No, that's fine. I'm happy to amend the recommendation that we repay 300 £50,000 early to both Merton and Sutton, or as near as possible to that. So I'll probably do the annual tranches.
Yeah. Do I get the sense that everybody else thinks that's a good idea?
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Cool. Well, we'll probably come back to that when we go through recommendations. I've got Councillor Akigina's got a question. Sorry, when you use the hand up function on the thing, I can't see it. So if you can either raise your real hand or use the chat function, I'll be able to get to you a bit quicker. Sorry, Councillor, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, no, I was going to ask about the investment, but it seems to have been answered already, because I was going to say in this day and age when sort of investments are quite not straightforward, or you have to be really careful where we're going to invest it. But since we might be paying it back, the two cemetery boards back early, that's fine. And I was going to ask about the pensions. You said that you're going to take them up for 3 years. Why?
What way that pension funds work is that every 3 years you have a specialised valuation of your contributions into the pension fund and the drawings out of the pension fund. It's called an actuarial revaluation or valuation. We've just had our triennial assessment, and the fund is in a positive position. In the last assessment, it was in a negative position, and we had to do a secondary top-up. So they would take a certain percentage off of salaries, and then there was a secondary tranche that they took, which was a top-up. So that was 37,000. We've been told that they will only take now the primary deduction off of people's salaries. So there is no need for the provision for the 37k.
Okay.
We will then find out in 3 years' time the impact that that's had.
Okay, thanks, Sue.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any more? Sorry, any more questions on this before we move to recommendations? No? Okay. So I think before we go through the recommendations one by one, we'll need to come up with some wording to amend recommendation E, if that is something that we're wanting to do. And I don't know whether we want to change that to ask for an exploration of the options about how we pay, who we pay, when we pay, and when we invest and how much we invest, before we make a final decision.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so that's...
Yeah, could I just say that, because I do apologise, I didn't answer Agatha's question on that. We have specialist staff within the authority. We have a specialist treasury manager. So it would be that person that I would ask to provide advice on the options for investment. So, sorry.
Okay, no, thank you. So are we okay to amend E to that then? So to explore options, and perhaps do we need it to come back to the next committee with some ideas, or will that, Zoe, do you know if that will be sufficient time for the next board, or do we need longer?
No, that would actually be ideal, because hopefully the next meeting will be in February, and we will then have a clearer idea of the impact of COVID-19 coming through. So
okay. So can I just ask the Democratic Services officers, what's the procedure in terms of amending E? Do we just, now that we've said it's amended, or do we have to formally propose it and second it?
I think for clarity, if you can propose and second it and then take a vote on that.
Okay, sure. So as who would anyone like to propose the actual wording itself? Much more eloquent than I. Councillor Draper or Councillor McGrath?
I think Councillor Williams is ideally suited to that. You know,
he would be if he was on the right page. Which page are you looking at, Chairman?
This is page 15 of the PDF.
Oh, page 15.
recommendation's actually on page 13.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for them in a different place. Well, I think to approve the potential repayment of £600,000 of loans to Merton and Sutton.
Does that? I don't know if that covers that. Does that cover enough? The idea that we want them to explore what the.
I think we should say something like we asked the officers to explore the issues around repaying up to £600,000 of our loans.
Okay.
Yeah, it'd be early repayment, wouldn't it?
Early repayment.
Yeah, maybe we could mention that due to the fact of the very low interest rates available, we would like to look into the alternative of repaying some loans as a better financial option.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So can I ask the clerk, is that clear for what to note in the minutes? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Fantastic. So can I have, I'm going to take Councillor Williams as a proposer of that. Can I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Okay, Councillor Draper. And can we vote on that recommendation? So all those in favour? Okay, thank you. So that amends recommendation E. And then should we take the recommendations, the rest of the recommendations together? Or do you want to go through A through E?
Do them all together.
No, take together.
Okay. So can we agree recommendations A through to E on page 13 of the report?
I'd like to just question whether we couldn't ever so slightly amend that risk on page 34, as I stated. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but to take some of the sting out of it, to make it more.
Okay. So that will be a change to recommendation D.
Yes.
So should we vote on that one separately?
Yeah. Okay. So okay, fine. Let's do A, B, C, and E together, and E is amended, and then we'll amend D and take it. So A, B, C, and E. If you can raise your hand to approve those. Thank you. And so that's carried. And Councillor Draper, do you want to suggest then an amendment to recommendation D?
It's very difficult, this, isn't it? Yeah, I think if we just removed the last sentence from the consequence, where the initial surge in income will be offset by lower than expected income levels for a period of time, and the board may struggle to break even over this period. That is the real sensitivity. I also think under control actions, COVID-19 is not currently classified as a pandemic. It may not be, but again, it's a sensitive issue. An awful lot of people whose dear ones have died might actually consider it to be a pandemic. So just for the point of view of sensitivity, it might be a good idea to just remove that.
Can I speak against that?
All right, of course, Councillor Williams.
You know, we all recognise that Councillor Draper's a much more sensitive person than I am, but
that's true.
The fact of the matter is, we are a cemetery board. We are talking today about how we deal with death, and we're talking about the finances of the board. And what the risk register says, and nobody's ever queried it before, is a fact that if we get a surge in deaths, sadly, as happens in a pandemic, that will boost our income, but further down the line, it might even out, and a subsequent period, there will be a loss in income. Well, that's just a fact, and I don't think we have to be assuaging the. I would wonder how many people even knew that we have this risk register for this kind of meeting. But I don't think anybody's going to be offended by a fact.
Okay. Is there anybody else would want to comment on this before we move through the?
I would just on that, and David, I do entirely understand what you're saying. You're right. The likelihood of people going through the risk register and finding offences is remote. Perhaps it's so remote it ought to be on the risk register. I don't know. But in another place, I chair the crematorium board, the Merton, Sutton and Wandsworth crematorium board, and that, you know, the number of cremations has risen enormously. We're not looking at it in terms of that means that we're going to be losing cremations over the next few months and years. We're looking at it in terms of we've had to cremate an awful lot more people, and now what are we going to do? And given what we've just been talking about giving some money back to Merton and Sutton, that's really what we should be looking at, rather than this, which actually does look like it's saying, well, we're going to lose some money. I mean, that's just the way that I look at it. I fear that if anybody were, and David is right, it's unlikely, if anyone were to challenge the register, that is how they look at it as well. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. I having reread that section, I'm of the view that we might want to, instead of changing the officer's recommendation, just make a note in the minutes of the points that you've raised.
That's fine.
Yeah, I mean,
that's fine.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay. I'm not going to lose sleep over it.
Okay, thank you. So can we move then, unless anyone else wants to comment on this, just move to agree the recommendation as it is. I don't think we can amend the recommendation in a way that will necessarily meet the objectives, okay, of changing the language of the report itself. Okay, so kind of, yeah, Zoe?
Could we change recommendation to June 2020, not June 2019, please? That's my error.
Okay, what was that, sorry?
Change the review and agree the risk register as at June 2020.
Okay, yeah, so we can amend it, we'll amend it in that way. So can we, I don't think we need to take a vote on that amendment, but can we just agree point D and then, so show of hands. Thank you. I think that's passed, and then we'll move on. So the next item on the agenda, which is going to be a bit more difficult given the absence of Doug, is the contractor report.
I'll happily introduce the contractor report.
Okay.
Zoe,
yeah.
Do we need to go into private session to do so?
According to my agenda, that's after
yes,
this.
sorry, my apologies.
Okay. So we now receive regularly through each meeting of the board an update from the contractor, which is normally followed by a verbal update from the client side officer, which we normally go into private session for. So the contractor report focuses on three main areas. It looks at key performance activity, complaints and compliments, and the income to the board in a bit more detail than it's reported elsewhere. So within section 2, you'll see summarised the main items that have been of interest. And you see there is a specific section there on the new bearer beams and replacement bearer beams, which really sets out exactly the position that the board was in at the end of the financial year. So within the statement of accounts, we spent just over 9k of the 50k, and as you can see, it had to get underway in March when COVID-19 struck. And we also have a section on COVID-19 where the ID Verdi have responded by providing an extra burial slot each day to cope with the additional numbers. And then moving on to the complaints and compliments, that even though they'd been under additional pressure from numbers, that the people using the service have been quite complimentary over the service that's actually been provided. The complaints really are those that have been governed by central government, so there's nothing that they can do about those. But you know, summarised nicely in 2.21 and 2.22. And then finally, with, oh sorry, I apologise, as Appendix 1, as we've said, the capital programme of the board really focused on two areas, or the big works programme. It was the bearer beams and memorial testing. So what we mean by the memorial testing is on top of the bearer beam. So the beam goes all the way along the various graves, and at the head of the grave is where you put the gravestone or the memorial. And there are issues with how the memorials have actually been fixed to the bearer beam. And this is where what's called topple testing has been undertaken. And then where the memorials are found to be lacking in the way that they've been attached to the bearer beam, individual letters, I'm not sure if they are or have been sent out to relatives of the people actually in the grave. So you've got a sample there of the letter that would actually be sent out. Then within Appendix 2 and Appendix 3, you have the interment levels over the last 5 years to May. Now, what I'm not sure is whether the 30th of May is to the end of the month or if it is to the 18th of May, as is in Appendix 3. I believe it is to the end of May because there's nothing to clarify anywhere in the report otherwise. And as you can see, there has been a surge in burial levels. I'm trying to word this as sensitively as possible over March, particularly in April, and that figure is starting to go down in May. And we will monitor these levels quite closely going forward to see the longer term impact. And then within Appendix 3, you can see the actual income levels resultant from those interment levels. So there might be a slight delay between payments and use of the service. So here you can see there has been a particular surge in income during April. So slightly, actually that matches, doesn't it? The April surge. So, and then we've only got part figures for May, unfortunately. Now I have got a statement from Doug. Louise, do you think this should be read out as part of this or as part of the client report or client verbal update?
I think part of the client verbal update.
Right, okay. Has anybody got any questions on this report?
So Councillor Morell wanted to raise something about the report first. Annie?
It was just about the bearer beams, Zoe. On 2.11, it was to date only one beam has been installed. However, during the installation of this beam, I'd already highlighted on a number of occasions that the beam was not fit for purpose. I don't know how much money we have to replace the beams, but is it to replace the beams with a beam that's not fit for purpose because we might need more money going forward? Zoe?
That's not something I'm afraid I can answer. So I think we can raise that question directly with Doug to actually clarify what was meant by not fit for purpose.
Right, okay. Well, something, Zoe, that's not fit for purpose, we wouldn't be using. So it's, and it's really important that we get these bearer beams changed.
Yep.
So can you get Doug to respond as soon as possible?
Yeah, I think there'll be a number of questions that Doug will need to respond to. So we will note them down and ask him to respond after the meeting. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Councillor McGrath had a question.
My question was on exactly the same point, but just to go one slightly further, I do think that if we're having a statement like that in a paper that comes to us, the papers, which you know quite rightly are in the public domain, should include an explanation of what the issue is and what Merton's response is.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath, and I agree. It is quite unclear about what they really mean by that. Councillor Draper wants to make a suggestion. I've got the. You're muted, Councillor.
Yeah, there we are. I know. I was
okay.
Struggling with my laptop there. Yeah, it's another thing that David Williams will tell me what a sensitive soul I am. It's about the kind of human cost of having to increase the rate of burials and as they did. I suspect actually that May figure does not cover the whole month. If it does, it doesn't fit in remotely with the increases in the crematorium numbers. And I'd actually like for this committee to actually send a message of thanks to the crematorium, the cemetery staff for coping with the increased work, and of course not just the increased work. If you look at those complaints about the number of mourners allowed, etc. Those complaints are just the written complaints, the verbal complaints that have been received over the telephone by to the staff. They certainly happened in the crematorium. I suspect they'll have happened in the cemetery as well. And the staff will have had to cope with that. And I think that we should show our thanks to them for what they did. Okay.
Thank you. And I don't think anyone on this board would disagree with that. And I think one thing that struck me when I was reading this report was one of the responses to this has been to train new people to dig graves. So people who were doing another job before the pandemic having to be retrained to dig graves to bury people. I think that's quite poignant, and it's really important that we as a board send our thanks and recognise the work that's been done. Councillor Akagina has another question.
Yes, Zoe, I'd just like to know, because before with the bearer beams, there was things about it was a headstones, there was a problem, and the mourners or the res, whoever owned it, Doug was going to inform them. Do we know if they've been informed, and are they going to fix it, or are we going to fix them? Do you remember?
The bearer beams, I think, are what we put down because they straddle across.
Remember, he said it was headstone. Some of the bearer beams were up.
That's right.
Yeah. So he was going to tell the owners of the grave. So has he told them?
Well, that's put the letter in Appendix 1 in. That's going to be the letter that goes out. But what I wasn't sure was if they had actually sent any letters out. So I can confirm that for you.
Because there's more than one, there's quite a few. So
yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. And yeah, we'll try and get a response on that to you. Do we have any more questions on the public side of this report before we move to the recommendation and then move to the exclusion of the public? No? Okay, so for item 7, the recommendation that we have to agree is, where is it? It's to, what's the wording now? I think it's to note the report. Members review the information and note the content of the report. So can we all agree to note the content of the report? Okay, that's carried. So the next item is the exclusion of the public. So this is to resolve that the public are excluded from meeting during the consideration of the following reports on the grounds that they are exempt from disclosure by virtue of paragraphs 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Can we agree that? Yeah. Does that mean we now have to go off YouTube?
It does, Chair.
Okay, so I'll give a few seconds for